This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
In the midst of the ongoing political tug-of-war in the U.S. and the ever-present debates around progressive identity politics, we invite you to join us for a down-to-earth look into the great American divide. No matter which side of the aisle you find yourself on, the polarization is hard to ignore. But what happens when someone defies expectations and challenges the status quo? Enter C.J. Pearson, a young black trailblazer who made an unexpected journey from the left to the right wing of the political spectrum. In this episode, we're going to delve into the complexities of progressive ideology, the growing influence of identity politics, and the role of African Americans within the Republican Party. With the upcoming elections looming, it's the perfect time to reflect on the fascinating journey of individuals like C.J. Pearson, who challenge the norms and spark conversations about race, ideology, and the future of American politics. C.J. Pearson is a young, up-and-coming, sharp PragerU personality and a frequent guest of Fox News. So grab a seat and get ready for a candid, thought-provoking discussion that navigates the intricate intersection of politics, identity, and the quest for common ground. Okay, I feel like we gotta give it away with this one.
It's ChatGPT. We use ChatGPT too.
We're using ChatGPT to make the intros, and it's actually
Who
way
doesn't
better
use
of a
AI,
writer than us.
Right.
Like, it surprises me.
It was super complimentary. I loved it. I love AI. Let's go.
We gave it the content. We gave it the inspiration.
Yeah.
So wait, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're here as part of a group from PragerU.
Yeah. So this is actually my first time ever in Israel, and it's been such an incredible experience. It's been a very, very busy past few days. We've been here since Monday. It's Sunday now, but we have certainly not wasted any time. We've gone to Jerusalem, gotten to tour the old city, we've gotten to go to the city of David, which was an incredible experience. Certainly as a Christian, to see so much of what's going on there and what happened there. It was a feeling that I don't even know if I have words yet to express about, like, kind of that feeling that I took away from that. And then we also went to the Dead Sea for a little bit of fun there. It's one of the, this is, I don't know how PC you guys' podcast is, but I was joking I was joking around with a friend. It's probably the safest place for a black person to swim because there's no chance for us to drown, which, I was certainly having a great time in. And so we went to the Dead Sea, did a little float there. And then after that, hiked Masada, which very hot, but also to take in that history was certainly a really, really fun experience. And since then, we've just been in Tel Aviv, which has been also really cool and is a world of its own, especially after going to places like Jerusalem and Masada. You can certainly see the difference between all of those places. But no, there's so much character to this country that I don't think a lot of people ever really realized until they come here. So it's been incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, the new and the old, right? Like Jerusalem and Jaffa and the antiquity, and then Tel Aviv is like this young, vibrant city. It's like the Silicon Valley of the Middle East.
That doesn't sleep, it seems. It's like until 5 a.m. everything's going. I love it personally, but it's definitely a lot different than Jerusalem.
We literally had the White Night on Thursday night. I don't know if you guys were around, but there was like an all-night festival.
Night without a K.
Night.
Yeah.
Without a K. Yes. Yeah. The white night as in the night you don't sleep.
Mm-hmm. No way. Oh, wait. I think we actually, so I have actually some friends who are doing their birthright trip right now. So I had a friend who I go to school with at Alabama, who is here right now, and we went out together for the White Night. It was great. So it was
cool.
There was no sleeping going on for sure. I love it.
So you're very young.
Yeah, 20 years old.
20 years old. How did you get into commentating?
Yeah. For me, it started when I was super young. So I was in the second grade, which is kind of a crazy story to ever repeat back. And especially as I near my birthday next month, it'll be almost a decade of having been politically involved. But when I was in the second grade, my teacher, Mrs. Best, had us do a mock election where she wanted us to research the candidates at the time who were running. And at that time, it was then Senator Barack Obama and, of course, Senator John McCain. And we were going to have to decide who we wanted to vote for at the end of that particular week. And so I remember actually sitting down, watching the presidential debate that year on CNN on my grandparents' floor, who I was raised by, and watching that debate. And obviously, I'm a 6 or 7-year-old kid. I have no idea what Iran is, what healthcare reform means, none of these big, wonky words that just are my day-to-day life now, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I had no idea what that meant when I was 6 or 7. But I knew that what they were talking about was really important. I was captivated by the energy of the discussion and how serious they were talking about these things. And so I was just genuinely curious about what it actually meant. And so later in that week, I actually go and I casted my vote for John McCain in that presidential election. And the reason for me was because, my grandfather, he served 20 years in the military. I grew up all around my home, seeing all of his, American flags, all of his military memorabilia, all of his awards, all of his medals, and all of these things. Like, our house oozed patriotism. And to me, John McCain also oozed patriotism. And of course, with his history as a prisoner of war, it was something that was kind of a no-brainer for me, even at 6 or 7. But, ironic enough, you mentioned identity politics in the intro. I remember coming back home and talking to my grandparents, my grandmother in particular, about who I had chosen to vote for in that election. And she looked me in my eye and she said, "You must think that you're white." And, I had no idea what that meant at the time. I had no idea what identity politics was, what it even meant. I was just simply someone trying to vote for my values, right?
But you didn't know what that meant? Meaning, do you think you had an understanding of the fact that you were black and that some other kids are white? Like, was that?
Well, I think, and in terms of an observational standpoint, yes, they're black, I'm white. But in terms of that actually meaning anything, no. There was definitely nothing I assigned to race at the time or assigned to color. And I definitely didn't believe that the color of my skin should dictate my politics or value system or anything else.
We're in second grade.
Yeah, I was in second grade. Yeah,
let's not forget.
My biggest concern was Pokemon, Bakugan, and whatever was on Cartoon Network at the time. But so yeah, I was not some socially woke little second grader running around Augusta, Georgia. But after that conversation, though, with my grandmother, I was very curious about what she meant and why she said what she said. And so, I wasn't a Republican at the time. I wasn't a Democrat at the time. As you said, I was a second grader who happened to make a vote. But I did want to figure out where I actually did stand. And I remember watching, Fox News, and I remember watching MSNBC. I remember watching Sean Hannity. I remember watching Rachel Maddow. And I wanted to figure out, what I actually did stand for. And it included actually looking at the platforms of every single party, Democrat, Republican, even threw in a few third parties in there. You got the Libertarians, you got the Green Party. And when I actually looked at conservative values and what they meant and what they actually stood for, I realized these were the values that my grandparents had instilled within me. They were some pretty old-fashioned people. I grew up going to church every single Sunday. I grew up with the importance of family being emphasized almost every single day. Faith, family, God, all of those things were pretty integral parts of my upbringing. And when I looked at conservatism, there was not much daylight between what they had taught me. And so I think that when I say that I didn't know what identity politics was at the time, and the reason it was so liberating for me to have got involved when I was so young was because my entire worldview hadn't been tainted by this lie that progressives often spew, that, as I said, that the color of your skin should dictate your politics. I was able to look at it really objectively. Okay, Republicans believe this, Democrats believe this. This is how I was raised. This is the type of young man that my grandparents have tried to mold me into. This is, these are the policies that speak to me and where I'm at in this life. But they also are reminiscent of the values that my grandfather, a guy who I respect a lot, to say the least. This is a guy who loved his country, so much so that he served this country for 20 plus years. And so it didn't really make much sense that he would serve a country that was racist. He wouldn't make much sense for me that he would serve a country that wasn't great. And so I just didn't think that was true. And, fast forward quite a few years, that, has been validated for me.
But let me ask you, now at the age of 20, you said 20?
20, yeah.
20, do you, what place, I guess, does race play in who you are? Do you feel connected to your race, and do you feel like culturally that's part of you?
Yeah, I will say, like, I'm a black man living in America. That is an inescapable fact. But I think the difference between those on the left and the right is that I have never viewed my skin color as a disability. I've never viewed blackness as an impediment to the life I want to live or the success I want to achieve.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, like, I think we agree, like, I want to hear more about that. But I want to.
Yeah.
What I'm asking is, like, is it any part of your cultural identity? Like, do you feel like there's a part of you that's like of your cultural identity that's black?
Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, for sure. I think maybe it's the music I listen to or the food I eat sometimes. I think that's definitely an inescapable part of who I am, similar to the way in which, an Italian American loves, good spaghetti and, and a good Italian wine, which I know my friend over here likes. And, and it's a part of it. But I think that, unfortunately, and I think you bring up a very good point, is that there are some people who've allowed blackness to also supersede, in a sense, they're also national allegiance. There are people who see themselves as black first or white first or whatever else, and not American first. Which I think is what differentiates those people in the black community from those who are conservative and those who are progressive, because I genuinely do see myself as an American first. I believe that, we live in the greatest country in the world and that we have so much freedom and liberty to achieve so much. And I think that, we lived in a time in our country, thankfully I wasn't alive during that time, but there was a time in our country where people were divided over something as uncontrollable as the color of their skin. And I think that if you're against that, if you are revulsed by that, then why not embrace the thing that we all share, which is our common heritage and, allegiance as American citizens who want to see our country thrive and prosper. Why divide when we can unite? And that's a very easy thing to unite around.
So back to 10-year-old CJ.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between understanding your views, right? But as an ex-politician friend of mine once said to me, like, very few people have this germ, right, of having this itch to speak out, and you have to tell other people what you think, what are your opinions, and convince them in your opinions, right? So when did that come to be?
I think for me, it was also, kind of a byproduct of how I was raised, probably. I was an only child, and so I was very outspoken in my home, and my grandparents listened to me, and little did they know what little monster they were creating. But, I was taken seriously in my home, which I think gave me a little bit of courage and conviction to go out and, share my beliefs and thoughts, which would later come on, down the road. And so in terms of my entrance into commentary, that actually started when I was 12 years old. And so I had just worked on my first campaign in the 2014 midterm elections. I was doing the grunt work of politics. I was knocking on doors, making phone calls in the hot Georgia heat. But I was the type of kid that liked to stay busy. And so one day I remember Rudy Giuliani had made, the former mayor of New York City, had made some criticisms of President Obama at the time. And the national media derided him as a racist, bigot, all these things. And I was like, there's not anything really racist about what he said. He was just simply making a criticism of President Obama. And so I made this YouTube video in response to it. I just gotten this camcorder for Christmas, hadn't used it. So I roll out of bed, and this is February of 2015, and I just go direct to camera, and I just absolutely tear into Obama. I say, how can you, call ISIS the JV team when they're slaughtering Americans, when they're killing journalists? How can you say that you want Americans to succeed when you believe that you should be redistributing wealth? These two things are not congruent to one another. They're not true. They're not right. Even 12-year-old CJ knew that. And so I made that video, and the video went viral almost overnight. Got 2 million or so views, absolutely rocketed around the internet. And, for the record, I had no YouTube channel. This was my first YouTube channel, my first video that I ever uploaded. It was kind of a little bit of a Justin Bieber moment, famous overnight, which was super wild and surreal. But I think the thing that gave me the courage to speak out was the fact that, number one, it was how I was raised, but also to see that there were so many people willing to listen to, at that time, a 12-year-old kid who just had really strong opinions and was, thankfully a little bit articulate in the way that I was able to present them. But it was that. I think it was validation of the fact that people do care about what the future of America have on their minds and what they have to say, which is, oftentimes when I talk to my peers, the reason they say that they don't want to get involved in politics, or the reason they don't want to actually take a stand or be vocal in either direction, is because they don't think that they would be taken seriously. And I'm like, you can't talk to me and have that conversation, because that's the exact opposite. Now, as I've gotten older, and I'm 20 years old now, do I ever wonder why people were listening to a 12-year-old boy? Yes, I do. But I am grateful for it, because I wouldn't be where I am now if they hadn't. But I do think that people do want to hear about what the next generation of leaders, not only here in America, but across the world, have to say. It's, I think, why you see the infatuation with people like Malala here in the Middle East, and, so many other places, because it's just like, this is the world that we're going to have to inherit one day. So we might as well be vocal and have a stake in the direction that our country and our world is heading as a whole. And that's always been my mindset, because at the end of the day, I can put my head in the sand and pretend like as if these issues aren't going to affect me, but they absolutely will. They're going to affect me now, even before I have kids, and they're going to affect my children and their children, and so forth and so on. And so I think that at the end of the day, JFK once said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And America has done a lot for me. And to be someone who was the product of a mother who had him when she was in high school, had no idea how to raise a child, was in no position to raise a child. For me to be able to do what I do every single day, and to have the platform that I have to just speak about these issues that are so important to so many people, and people actually listen and take me seriously, it's one of those things that I can't explain as anything other than the American dream.
Want to dive into some political stuff?
Yeah, but I want to ask about your mom and your grandparents today. Like, where do they stand with where you're at right now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. They're still Democrats. They're still liberals and progressives.
You had one job,
right? I had one job.
Nobody's perfect.
Right. I always joke around with people whenever they ask me about them. I'm like, I'm pretty sure the only Republican that they'll ever vote for is me, and I don't even know if that's a lock. So, I'm really hoping for the best, praying for it. But it's interesting. I think that as the modern day Democrat Party in America has drifted more to the left and has grown more radical, it's kind of opened their eyes a little bit, because they're just like, this isn't the JFK Democrat Party that I grew up supporting. This isn't, the Bill Clinton Party even. This is like people saying, that white people are inherently evil, that that black people are inherently victims, and that children should be able to undergo gender transition surgery as young as just being a toddler, because they have this feeling that they may not be the right gender, when a few years ago, or at least when I was growing up, which again wasn't that long ago, if a girl acted a little bit like a boy, she was a tomboy, she wasn't a guy. Like, people weren't trying to convert children. And I think a lot of these issues that have really cropped up, in Americans' political discourse now, have sort of drifted them a little bit to the right. We're not completely there yet, though. They definitely weren't too big of a fan of President Trump, who, of course, I was a supporter of, and all of those things. And I still do get texts. It's so funny. They'll see I'll post a video going after the left, as I do every day, and they'll send it to me. They're like, CJ, I don't know if that's true. And like, we'll go back and forth over text, but it's good. I really do think that it was so important, and I really do take a lot of value in having grown up in the way in which I did, because it exposed me to other people's arguments, where I feel like oftentimes even people on the right, they grow up in such an echo chamber where they don't really know how to talk to other people. They don't really know how to persuade other people, where every single day I had to try to do that, at least put my best foot forward. I may not have succeeded, and fortunately, as you can tell by the voter registration, I've not yet, but I always made my best effort. And two, I think that if we're actually going to convince people, we have to learn how to actually converse with them first. And that's what it taught me. So it's like, when I went to college, I was never really affected by the fact that there were going to be liberals and leftists around me. It's like, it's just a fact of life, which I think is just tolerance. I think tolerance goes both ways. Unfortunately, the modern day left doesn't have that much in America these days. You can just look at our college campuses for evidence and proof of that. But I don't know if I would be as tolerant as I am, or as able to just sit down and break bread with other people who disagree with me, if I hadn't had that upbringing. I have many people who I agree with on many issues who can't do that with other people. which is unfortunate, but, hasn't been something that's ever affected me.
You mentioned that you're a supporter of Trump.
Yeah.
Are you supporting him for the 2024 run?
Yeah. Well, I think it's
is there any other candidate you have in mind?
Yeah, well, I think it's very early. It's interesting. I feel like the U.S. political cycle, we go from election to election, and it's like, it used to be 2 years, but now it's 2 weeks, and then the next thing you know, you hear about all these people who are trying to run for president. But I think it's hilarious. I joke about how big the field has gotten. It's like, I think it's almost at 15 to 16 people. It's like, I feel like a lot of people are just starting to run for president as like a remedy to their midlife crisis. It's just like, come on, like buy a boat, like go sailing, go do something, go build a car. Like normal people buy Mustangs when they're going through a midlife crisis. People in American politics, they run for president. It's a shame. But I think President Trump obviously did a lot of great things as president. I think that if you look at his record, having the lowest black unemployment rate in our nation's history, everything he did in terms of the economy was great. I think it's why he's leading, considerably in the polls, is because people really do respect the work that he did, but also miss him a little bit. And Joe Biden has done a very good job at reminding people of how good we had it. But also that didn't just come by accident. Like, it was the result of a lot of work. But, I think our fuel is great. I like Vivek Ramaswamy. He's saying a lot of great things. Really smart guy. I admire a lot. Governor DeSantis has been, great for the people of Florida. He's done a lot of great things there.
So why not DeSantis?
I think he's interesting. I think that it's early. We'll have to see, if his message really catches fire. I think his record's great, but I think that there are a lot of people who are interested in seeing Trump finish the job. Now, I think the thing in the back of everyone's head really is that, obviously he's in a great position to win the primary based on every poll that we've seen. But can he win the general, right? And I think that's where people are really wondering, and people are really kind of still scratching their heads. But I think that I do think that because of how bad Biden has been, if you look at inflation, if you look at the prices that Americans are paying at the gas pump, if you just look at the state of American culture, there are a lot of people who I think are interested in going in a different direction. And I think it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be an interesting next few years.
I'm gonna, just for the sake of not turning this into it's already a bit of an echo chamber, but to break us out of the echo chamber a little bit, because it's no surprise, I think, to a lot of our listeners that we share a lot of the same opinions. But I'll ask you about, do you have any qualms with the way that January 6th went down, and that the way that Trump handled that, and the way that he handled the results of the election?
I think that, in any democracy that, if you can't challenge the results of an election, or if you can't contest the results of an election, then that's not really a true democracy. And I think that he was within his role as someone who was on the ballot, and I think as someone who got as many votes as he did, to basically say, hey, there are some irregularities here, and maybe we should take a look into that and see whether or not, there's
but
more
you
of
and I
this.
know he didn't say it like, that's not the Trump way of saying things, right?
Well, yeah, he was a bit more bombastic about it, as true to character. But no one's gonna sit here and say that January 6th was a good day in American history. It certainly was not. But I do think that as far as how it began, in terms of him saying, hey, like, based on these irregularities that happen in these states, and some of these things that have come out about this election, that I want to vocalize, I want to be vocal about what has happened here. I think he was well within his rights to do it. And also Democrats have done that, which is kind of the ironic thing that you don't often hear about in the media. I'm from Georgia. Stacey Abrams, she ran for governor in 2018. She was this close to winning, and she refused to concede the election. And she said that, the election was stolen from her, all of these things, using the same rhetoric that President Trump used. But it wasn't, a calamity then. It wasn't a problem then. And then you have, folks who, like to say that, if you don't accept the results of the 2020 election, you're an election denier, and all of these things and whatnot. But you have the current minority leader of the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, who voted against certifying the election results, and also was very supportive of Stacey Abrams' refusal to concede when she ran for governor. And so I think that, this is interesting. I think a lot of people in the national media obviously are already very critical of Trump. Just, the man could breathe the wrong way and they want to impeach him for it. But yeah, so I don't know. I think challenging the results was within his rights. I think that if there is fraud in any election, that we should root it out. I think that the most important thing for the American people to be able to have is confidence in our elections, and if they don't, then it's concerning. It's a dark day for America. It's a dark day for democracy. But I think that more and more Americans are fixated on 2024, right? They're fixated on how do we go from here? They're fixated on inflation. They're fixated on the price they're paying at the pump. They're fixated on the economy. And so I think that it does need to be a transition in the message, right? Like, we can't just keep talking about the election of 2020. We've got to move on from that. We've got to talk about, obviously, what happened. There were some, not good things that happened in that election in terms of processes and whatnot. But we got to secure the elections. That's important. But we also have to start talking about the issues that people are fixated about every single day.
But what I'm wondering is, in light of all the progressiveness and the sort of, I guess, the vacuum of morality on the left, or what I would describe as a vacuum of values, of traditional values. Do you really think that Trump kind of personifies the opposite end? Like, is his character really something that you think American children should look up to? That, this like decadent, like no holds barred, right? Like,
yeah,
just like,
well, I don't think American children should look up to any politician. is my like de facto position on that. But I think that there are things that to admire.
But you looked up to John, McCain.
I respected his service. Yes, I think that it was something to admire about him in the same way that I think President Trump has many admirable traits in terms of his tenacity to fight. I think that he is someone who doesn't necessarily seek the fawning of the political elite and the media, which I think is very important in a place where you're never going to get it. One of my biggest sources of confusion is sometimes watching conservatives and Republicans fight so hard for the media to like them when it's never going to happen. You guys probably have that experience here, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, is that, regardless of how hard he tries, these people will probably never really like him, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much good he does, how much good he does for the region and so much else. Like, these people are not going to like him. And what's interesting, I was reading a story about the Prime Minister recently about when he did his iconic video with the water, taunting the Iranian regime. And there is an article, I think, in
Haaretz.
Yeah, and they were saying that, if he keeps this up, we're going to be out of a job or whatever. And it's like, but these people still find a way to hate him. And it's just like, I think that's where Trump is. At the end of the day, it's like, is he perfect? No man is perfect. No politician is perfect. But I think that at the end of the day, when you look at the cultural decay that's happening in America, maybe he's the fighter that we need right now. And I think that, God has a way of using imperfect people to rise to the occasion and do the things that need to be done. And I think that when you look at his 4 years as president, he did that, and he did a very good job in terms of the economy, in terms of fighting a lot of this cultural decay. But yeah.
I was telling Eitan just the other day when the rulings of the Supreme Court have been released.
Yeah. Which would not have been possible without him.
Exactly.
Well,
I
right?
was telling Eitan that's Trump's legacy.
Yeah.
Right? That's his biggest legacy.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to see how, it's been a few years since he stepped down, and only now the left starts to really understand what he did to, like, within his rights, right?
Yeah.
I think they understood what was coming. That's why you saw that.
That's why they want to pack the courts and expand.
But with Brett Kavanaugh, the reaction to
but there's theory and there's practice, right? When it actually hits you, it's something else. So first of all, what do you think about the whole Harvard quotas? How do you call it in English? It's
affirmative action.
Affirmative action. What do you think about that? Do you
I think
agree?
the policy itself is inherently racist. I think the idea that Black Americans need an extra help from the government just to be just as good as white Americans is an inherently bigoted idea. I don't need that personally, and I don't need the color of my skin to open any doors for me. I think my work ethic will do that. I think my ambition will do that. I think my drive will do that.
Even if it means that in Ivy League you will see no African Americans eventually. eventually?
Well, that's the thing. I don't think that'll be the case. I think that it's actually going to be one of those things where it's going to be kind of a call to higher, purpose for a lot of people in the black communities. Like, if you want to be in the Ivy League, if you want to go to Harvard University, you have to work hard, as it should be. And the thing is, if unfortunately there are no black people at Harvard University because of these actual standards that are built on merit, then that's a way different conversation that we need to be having as a country and as a community about why we are not sending more African Americans to Ivy League universities.
But we know it's not only about merit in Ivy League, right? There was this huge debacle with the celebrities, right? Who bought
paying admission,
yeah.
I thought you were talking about with the test scores.
No, also with the test scores, but also they donated money and they got their kids There was this story.
Yeah, there's so many people who their parents will write a $200,000 check and build a library and they'll get in, which is a totally different discussion. I think legacy admissions should probably be looked at as well. Because I think if we're actually going to be, pro meritocracy, we should be pro meritocracy across the board. But again, I think this idea that you see from a lot of people on the left right now is that black people are kind of destined to fail in a world absent of affirmative action is actually very flagrantly racist, and is one of those things that I'm kind of amazed that they're saying out loud, because pointing to my own story again, like if you look at the statistics associated with most people who have my upbringing who are born out of wedlock and raised by their grandparents or whatever else, I'm not supposed to be where I am today, but because of hard work and drive and the behaviors that were modeled to me by my grandfather and my grandparents
and
talent and whatever else, right?
Freedom.
But and freedom and also the incubator that is the United States, I've been able to do a lot. And so I think that at the end of the day, again, and I think you make a very interesting point, is that if we get to a point where there is no black person at Harvard University, which I, again, am doubtful that will ever happen. But if we do get to that point, then we need to have a cultural conversation about why are we as a community not sending more black people to Ivy Leagues in a merit-based system? How do we create a culture that actually incentivizes academic success and exceptionalism, not a culture that glorifies violence and nonsense and all of these things, right? And so I think that unfortunately we've drifted to that at a point. I don't think that defines our community, but it certainly is something that doesn't help it.
But if you polled the black community in the States, it's safe to say most of them would not like this ruling, right?
Yeah.
So how do you explain the gap? Like, how can't they see what you see?
Yeah, I think it's a product of decades of very, very intentional gaslighting and indoctrination, by the political left in America, right? I think it traces its history back to the 60s with, Lyndon, with LBJ's, Great Society, where it was really about fostering dependence upon the government by members of the black community, seeing themselves as unable to almost function without the help of the government, which isn't true at all. We did it before, and I think that we can still do that today. And so I think that unfortunately we have to really beat back over the course of many years, the social conditioning that has really taken effect in the black community. And it goes back to the kind of the earlier conversation I had when I went to my grandmother and I said, "Hey, I voted for this Republican," and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you must think that you're white." It's that same type of logic. It's type of social conditioning that they've always been told that, hey, you're black, you have to vote Democrat. For that same reason, hey, you're black, you should support food stamps. Hey, you're black, you should support affirmative action, because if you don't, it's coming for you. It's coming for your community. And I think that everyone always feels some type of way when they lose something. Any community does. I think if you look at, what happened in America with Roe v. Wade being overturned, I always tell this story because it's an issue that I still haven't really wrapped my head around about how we can actually message it and talk about it in America yet. But I have so many friends who are big supporters of female friends who were big supporters of Donald Trump, wear MAGA hats, all of these things. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, you would have thought it was the end of the world. Also, a credit to the messaging of the Democrats there. They messaged it as if it was like the end of abortion as, forever in America, when that wasn't the ruling. The ruling was that it would be up to, each individual state to obviously decide whether or not they wanted to allow it or what restrictions they would place onto it. But that is what many girls thought. And so they voted that way in the midterm election. So what was supposed to be a red wave and Republicans were supposed to sweep both chambers of Congress turned out not to be the case. We didn't win the Senate, and we have like a very narrow, I think, 7-seat majority in the House of Representatives. So, we've got to get better at messaging. We've got to get better at actually reaching people where they are, which has been something I've been very intentional about. I think that a lot of black people are weary of conservatism and weary of Republicans. Actually, I wouldn't say weary of conservatism. I think black people are still very culturally conservative. I think the same way that I was raised, faith, family, God, all those things are still pretty big within the black community, especially in the South. But I do think they are weary of Republicans because most of them have never met a Republican, right? And people hate what they don't understand. They hate they hate people they never met. Just like anyone would. And so I think that Republicans actually have to go and do a better job.
They live in the South and they go to college and school with these kids.
But they live among other black people, right? Who all vote Democrat, who may, be conservative in a value system, but there really is this cognitive dissonance, which even me, like sometimes I'm just like, I rack my brain to try to understand. It's like there is a true state of cognitive dissonance within the black community where it's like they're like, okay, well, I don't like a lot of this radical LGBTQ stuff, like in terms of the children and all of this stuff and some of the things that they're putting in schools and pornography and whatever else, but I'm still going to vote this way because I've always voted this way. My parents voted this way. My grandparents voted this way. And my response to that often is where has that gotten them? Because if you look at the inner cities of America, you look at Chicago, you look at Detroit, you look at all of these places that have been almost single-handedly ruled by progressive policies, progressive politicians over the years. You see poverty, you see crime, you see in places like Chicago where a black kid can't even go out and play on the sidewalk without the threat of a bullet being lodged in their head, and you think that this is something you want to continue to vote for. But they do. And so I think that is how deep, like, really we are and into this mess. Like it's the product of years and years of being told this is how you're supposed to vote. So close your eyes, put your head in the sand, and ignore it.
And of course, if you go against the stream,
people come for you. They try to cancel you.
What happened to you when like?
Yeah.
What happens to you today?
Right. They call you an Uncle Tom. They, send you death threats. Like, I've been doing this since I was 12 years old. So I'm a little bit numb to it now. It doesn't really affect me. It doesn't get to me. But, when I was like a little kid, when I was like 13 or 14 years old, there were people like sending me, death threats, online. It's like, are you really that triggered by what a little kid has to say that you're sending them death threats? It was ridiculous to me now. And it's even
Kids
more
are dangerous. Man.
Right. We're so dangerous. And it's ridiculous to me now, but what's interesting now is that, it's the same things. It's just that you're a tool of white supremacy. You're a tool of, of bigots and all of this stuff. It's like, I don't know if I try to show up to a KKK meeting if they're going to let me in. And I think the reason is obvious why they wouldn't let me in. So for you to sit here on this app on social media, be a keyboard warrior and say that because I disagree with you, because I support conservative policies or values, that I am a tool of white supremacy, the white supremacists don't like me, and it's something that I can't change. And so it's just...
But they like Trump.
I don't think they like Trump. I think if you look at, what his policies actually were in terms of the black community, giving a record amount to historically black colleges and universities, being the first president in modern history to actually do criminal justice reform, there is a lot of policies that he did to help black people that the KKK, I guarantee you, is not lining up to support. But what I will say is that the birthplace of white supremacy was the Democrat Party, which is a history that unfortunately far too many people in the black community are not aware of. And when I do tell them about it, it's often new news to them, which has always been so interesting to me because it's not taught in our schools today. We have critical race theory, being injected into our schools where you're learning that, somehow, white children are inherently racist and responsible for the sins of their grandfathers, who they weren't even alive for. Like, you're blaming little white kids for slavery when they themselves were not alive to have ever owned slaves, and the black kids in the room were not even alive to have been a slave. And it's just silly nonsense. But what you aren't being taught in schools, apparently for some odd reason, is the fact that the Democrats really founded the KKK. They were the people who were pro Jim Crow. They were the people who were pro putting my great great grandmother in the back of the bus. That is their history. That is their foundation. That is their bedrock. And so, and then of course you have the entire argument, the party switch. Well, I would like to believe that. I would like to believe that they saw the light, that they changed their ways, and that they have, truly become enlightened and, repented. But I don't see that, especially going back to affirmative action when they perpetuate this argument that if black people don't have affirmative action in a merit-based society, they are destined to fail. That's the same argument that the KKK would make. That regardless of how hard you try to help black people, regardless of how much you do for them, they will never, ever, ever be able to compete or be on the same level playing field as white people because we are inherently inferior. That is the argument that the left is making today in terms of this ruling. And I gotta say, it makes sense when you look at their history.
Have you ever experienced racism? I mean, you grew up in the South. You lived there for a while. You went to college there in Alabama, Tuscaloosa. The capital of racism.
Historically,
or
not today.
Yes. No, historically. The center of the civil rights movement. So, have you yourself personally ever experienced it? Has anybody ever said anything to you?
Not often. Maybe like there's a few instances of it, but they're so insignificant to me that I can't even really recall them, off the top of my head. I think that for me, this is, I think does racism still exist? Yes, it does. I think that is just a matter of fact. But I think the question that exists is like, how pervasive is it? I just don't think it is as pervasive as people pretend that it is, especially.
I mean, I grew up. We just talked about it on the show.
Yeah.
I grew up in the same areas as you. Like I was in Alabama and went to high school in Atlanta. And I mean, in the short time we were in Atlanta, like 4 years, I think there were twice, and there were other incidents that I wasn't involved in, where like cars would drive by the synagogues and throw stuff, and
you had stuff thrown at you. Also.
Yeah, like a yogurt, and there was like a whole incident of like eggs getting thrown at people. I didn't have one thrown at me, but like where people leaving the synagogues would get. You didn't have anything like similar where.
No, I think it's also like generationally too, right? I think, being in Gen Z and growing up in a time where people are just kind of a lot more colorblind than they used to be. And obviously historically for sure, I just didn't really experience much of that. And thankfully, right? But I think that also too, is that when I look at, the reality of racism, as I was saying, does it still exist? Yes. But is this pervasive thing that ever prevented me from achieving what I wanted to achieve or, doing what I wanted to do? No. I went to the University of Alabama. I was in a predominantly white fraternity at a predominantly white institution. Did I ever felt like I was treated differently because of that? No. But again, that is a result, of course, of the people who worked so very hard to make that a reality in our country, which I'm definitely thankful for. And I think that what we unfortunately see, though, in America is not racism, aimed towards the minority much anymore. It's not racism aimed towards black people or aimed towards, Mexicans or anything like that, or Latino Americans or whatnot. But it's actually racism that is not really condemned other than by conservatives, but racism is actively encouraged by the powers that be in America, which is against people who are straight, white, and male, and just white overall. It's like you can say anything you want about white people in America. You can, condemn them, you can, target them, and in the case of the Harvard University admissions decision, you can even prevent them from going to college because of the color of their skin, which is also uncontrollable, as it is for black people and any other color of any person.
Unless you're Michael Jackson.
Right, unless you're... but yeah, like that's the reality. So it's just that I think that's the actual racism that I see more so of every single day now, is actually racism aimed towards white people because they don't have an ally. They don't have, the media is not fighting their fight. If someone were to call me the N-word today, the New York Times, actually New York Times hates me, but someone in the media would probably, criticize it or condemn it as wrong and not okay. Or, a black person that they probably do like, I'm sure they would defend. But, if you were to say anything, any slur, any, type of thing against white people, people would probably celebrate it. They would say, you're so woke. This is so progressive.
You can't be racist towards the majority.
Yeah, you can't be racist towards the majority is the argument that they use. You can't be, there's a power dynamic, fallacy they love to talk about. And it's just...
Here in Israel, there's a big debate about freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. And the idea of freedom of speech is not really implemented in Israeli democracy like it is in America. And always Israelis go like there's a red line, right?
Yeah.
Beyond which stuff cannot be tolerated, right?
But to that point, I'm curious. So when I was driving actually back from Masada back into Tel Aviv, we came across the protests on the bridges.
Okay, yes.
So how is that protected speech here, or like how does that work?
Yes. Yeah. It's just demonstration. Depends, because some of those demonstrations are illegal.
Okay.
Are illegal. Also, some of them block the roads.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard about it.
But not the act of speech itself is illegal.
No,
I mean, they can say whatever they want.
They can say whatever they want. Could they though? I don't know. You cannot say, kill XYZ. Right, or
I think the like there's a couple of like planes on which like Israeli speech is more limited. One is incitement to violence.
Yeah.
Two is even like the
calling against the government, like hamrada, like rebelling, calling for rebellion and stuff like that.
But also defamation is much more, I think, flexible here.
Yeah.
Like you can sue anybody for any kind of level of defamation.
Yeah.
Like if they say
so there's no public figure protection or like higher standard here.
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a public figure protection.
What do you mean protection?
Like protection. If you're a public figure,
a member of Knesset has immunity.
Okay.
So member of Knesset can say almost anything, and he cannot be sued. But that's only 120 people.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about the KKK.
But there's also a limitation on, let's say, calling someone a Nazi, right? I think specifically
you can sue slander on that.
Yeah.
You can sue for slander.
No, but isn't there a law specifically around the use
I don't think so. No, that's in Germany.
Okay.
In Germany.
Not in Israel as well.
But I was wondering, like, as a Republican, I guess freedom of speech is a big value for you. So to answer all those Israelis who can't believe that, you're gonna fight for the right of haters to say their mind. So how do you see that? Would you do you support the KKK's freedom of speech?
Yeah, I do, and I also support the people who speak out against them, as I do. And I think hate speech is free speech. I think at the end of the day, it's obviously because I also think that speech doesn't inoculate you. Free speech doesn't inoculate you from the consequences of your speech, right? Like if you're a member of the KKK and you're going around and projecting those beliefs out into the world, like there are going to be consequences for those actions, like whether or not it's like enforced by society, by people who don't want to be friendly with you, or people who don't want to associate with you, or whether or not it's enforced by corporations and private entities who don't want to employ you because of your views, which I think is also their prerogative. And so I think that like there are so many safeguards and checks and balances to that sort of thing that like why not let them say what they want to say? Like who is that really affecting? Like if someone were to call me the N-word, I wouldn't be personally affected by it all that much. I would be angry about it in the moment, but I wouldn't necessarily think, they should be jailed for that, right? Because there are so many other consequences that they would likely face for making that decision to do that, right? So I think that in our day and age, like there's so many ways to enforce it, but I think the thing is like it's weird because hate speech has become such a huge umbrella that it's almost become like for some people on the left, like anything that they don't like is hate speech, right? Like if I say there are two genders, then I'm using hate speech. Where no, I'm simply using a biology book. But to some of them, that would be classified as hate speech, and so I think that's also another reason to say that hate speech is free speech, because I think we've gotten to such a soft snowflake-like society that we have drifted to a point where even speaking the truth is hate speech. And so if I were to say, no, hate speech is a bit too far, it crosses the line, what crosses the line today or doesn't cross the line today may cross it tomorrow. And there you go. I've sold myself out, and I just don't think that it's such a slippery slope. It's such a incredibly slippery slope.
So you're gonna run for politics?
Sounds like it.
I don't know. I'm super young right now. I'm definitely I've had the opportunity to do a lot of fun things, and just really advocate, for my generation, which has been, super important to me, and ensure that they have a seat at the table. So that's been my focus, and I look forward to seeing where that all takes me, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Wow, that was a politician's answer.
You're destined. You're destined.
There's a joke in Hebrew. There's this saying, "I'm not dealing with this at the moment," right? When a politician is asked, "Are you going to run?" and he said, "I'm not dealing with this question at the moment," then usually it means he's only thinking about this question all day long.
That's funny.
So you spoke about your grandfather, I think, serving in the military.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about?
Yeah. So I actually thought about going to a service academy, but I have asthma, so it's an automatic disqualification, unfortunately. But
in the U.S., it's not so prevalent, right? I mean,
asthma.
Serving in the military, I think it's not.
Well, right now they actually have a really hard time recruiting. Right now, which is
A problem.
It's definitely a
strategic problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a strategic problem that we have to get very serious in figuring out. And so, I don't know what the remedy to it is. I think that at the end of the day, it's going to have to be like a resurgence of patriotism and unity.
You can do it the Putin way, right? You go to all the prisons and jails,
right?
And go. I'll pardon you if you join the military.
Like that may have to happen one day. Like at this point, like there's just so many people my age who are just not interested in fighting, and it's such a complicated issue, because it's like for me, when I look at foreign policy, I think that America has gotten in a lot of trouble in the past with fighting very dumb wars, and I wouldn't be very eager to fight in those wars either. But at the same time, I think there is no higher honor than fighting for your country, which is something I respect so much about Israel, that that people have to go and serve, and they have to go, fight for their fellow man and serve alongside their fellow man. I think that's an incredibly beautiful thing. But there's also, I feel like, so much more patriotism here. Like you guys you guys love your country a lot, and I think there are lots of Americans who love their country, but I think it's a lot more self before country these days. And I don't know if that's generational, but,
I think even on the left, we just had, before you arrived, we had a guest.
From Haaretz newspaper.
Haaretz newspaper, left wing.
Yeah.
And he is... Like, if you put him next to a progressive left-wing American, the progressive left-wing American, the average progressive left-wing American hates America.
Yeah.
Thinks America is the
devil.
great devil.
Yeah.
Like, they see it almost like an Iranian sees America.
That's what's crazy. It's that... And then when you hear them talk about America, it's almost like you're living in a different world. And so I'll hear them describing the America that we live in, this imperialistic, racist nation that is oppressive every single day. And I'm just like, well, not the America I live in. And it's just, and it's hard because, like I said, I am totally fine with having conversations with people who disagree with me every single day. I enjoy it. I think it's invigorating to a point. But I think at the same time, though, it's just like there has to be some type of common ground or common frame of reference to a sense. And when you're saying all these things about America, which I've never experienced, which I know a lot of people who are like me, who come from a similar background, also have an experience, I just don't even know how to refute what you're saying because it doesn't really exist, right? And so, but yeah, I think that's something that we should take some inspiration from you guys in, is that like, you can disagree about America. You can disagree with the person who's in the White House. But that shouldn't affect your love of country, right? It shouldn't affect your patriotism, which I think, again, we need to have a renaissance of American patriotism because it's certainly on the dip. It's a shame.
Amazing. So you're here until Friday.
Yeah, here until Friday.
And so a lot to see yet.
Lot to see. So I think we're going ATV riding through the desert tomorrow, which I'm super excited about. Rode a camel the other day. I've never ridden a horse, but somehow I found a way to ride a camel before I rode a horse. So that's super fun. Dead Sea was great. It was so sick. And then, but again,
the food.
The food's been so good. I've never had shawarma. That was super good.
You're making me hungry, man.
Right. I was surprised. I'm like low key kind of a picky eater. Like I'm not the type of guy that looks at a menu and goes out of his way to try new things. And so like being here has definitely been an experience. And you guys don't have any bacon at breakfast. Right?
Well, there's places. There's
There are
places.
places. Not
but,
where I've been,
but not
but-
as.
Not
yeah,
if you're
prevalent.
next to the Dead Sea.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
yeah. That's actually a painful point.
Right.
Point,
Yeah. So,
Especially for this guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Smuggles it in every
Yeah.
time he.
no.
No, you can buy it some places, but yeah, it's
love it.
very scarce. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's been a little bit of a difference, a little culture shock there, but no, shawarma's been good.
Also, don't get
The
him
bread?
started on blueberry pancakes. It's
Is that not? Is that like a big thing?
pancakes are like it's like a scarce commodity here. And it's
So
not,
I had some pancakes the other. I went to the Lighthouse restaurant. It's like a breakfast place in a
yeah.
brown hotel, and they're little. They're no like flapjacks.
they
Like in
try and they make it
America, yeah.
fancy. Same
Yeah.
with burgers here. They don't
Yeah.
like rare are the places that they just have a good classic burger
Yeah.
or like a smash burger.
Yeah,
Every-
you guys need an
every-
In-N-Out. You guys need an In-N-Out.
Oh yeah.
A kosher In-N-Out.
Yeah.
We
No,
need
it
that.
doesn't have to be kosher. It's
No,
okay.
no. In Tel Aviv, there's like hardly kosher
Yeah.
restaurants.
Yeah.
No one
Yeah.
cares about it. But CJ, thank you so much for joining. It sounds like you have a super bright future. I can't
Yeah.
wait until we say we've interviewed the president
yeah.
of the United States
Yeah.
in 20 years.
Yeah.
I
20 may be
appreciate
a
it.
little early. 25.
25.
30.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll be still around. We're so fucking old.
Y'all are thriving. Y'all are living y'all's best lives around here. But
Yeah.
No, thank
But
you
thank
so much
you.
for having me. I
And what
appreciate
can we
it.
plug? You're everywhere.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
CJ
So guys,
Pearson.
Yeah, you guys can follow me at the CJ Pearson. You can check us out at prageru.com and keep up with our content there. And yeah, I'll see you there.
And Fox News.
And Fox News.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming,
Thank
man.
you.
Thanks
Really
for
appreciate it.
listening.
Enjoy your trip.
Thank
here.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.